Well, now, pull up a chair, son. Don't mind the creaking. This old porch has held more stories than it's held men. My name is Earl McKenna, and I've spent more time on salt water than I have on dry land. Most folks nowadays, they look at the ocean and see a pretty picture, something to put on a postcard. They don't see the truth of it. They don't see that it's a living thing, that it holds grudges, and that it remembers. The story you asked about? Yeah, I remember that one. It wasn't the biggest storm I ever saw, nor the biggest haul I ever brought in, but it was the day the sea learned my name, and it ain't never forgotten. This was, must be 40 years ago, maybe more. I was running the Iron Maiden out of a little harbor north of Bellingham, up in Washington State. Prime Dungeness crab territory, cold water, mean tide, and a fog that doesn't just sit on the water, it clings to it like wet wool. My partner on the Maiden back then was a fellow named Sam Riley. We called him Finch, not because he was small, but because he was always chirping about bad omens. If a gull landed on the port rail instead of the starboard, it meant a bad trip. If his coffee was too bitter, the currents were turning sour. A good man, Sam, strong as an ox, but he walked this life like he was stepping on eggs, always afraid of what he might bring. This day, though, even Sam was. That was the first warning. We'd left the dock hours before sunrise, guided by radar and a prayer. The sea was flat, not calm, mind you, flat, like a sheet of dark glass. There was no swell, no chop. The Maiden just cut through it, and the wake behind us seemed to heal up instantly, leaving no trace. The fog was so thick I couldn't see Sam working the winch on the stern, and he was only 30 feet away. It muffled everything. The diesel engine sounded like it was miles away, just a dull thump, thump, thump in the cotton wool. I remember squinting into the gray, my hands wrapped around the wheel, tasting the damp. "It's too quiet, Earl." Sam's voice came out of the mist, sounding jumpy. "It's working water, Sam," I called back, trying to sound surer than I felt. "Means the crabs are walking. We'll fill the hold by noon." I knew what he meant. The air didn't move. It wasn't air. It was a shroud. You could feel the pressure of it. It felt expectant, like the whole of the Salish Sea was holding its breath, waiting for something. We'd been pulling pots since first light. The haul was decent, nothing spectacular, steady. The crabs were big, dark-shelled, and angry, just how we liked them. We worked in silence, the clank of the steel traps hitting the deck, the splash as we rebaited and sent them back to the deep, the rattle of the winch. Sam Finch hadn't said another word about the weather, but I saw him rubbing that little silver medallion he wore under his oilskin. We were on our last string, the one I'd set deepest, right on the edge of a canyon that dropped off into God knows. "This is it, Finch!" I yelled, throttling the engine back. "Last one. Let's pull 'em and head for home. This fog is starting to get in my bones." I heard him hook the buoy, heard the hydraulic winch groan as it took the strain. I stepped out of the wheelhouse onto the deck, wiping the condensation off my face. The Maiden listed hard to starboard as the line went taut. The winch whined, a high-pitched scream that set my teeth on edge. "Earl!" Sam shouted, his voice tight. "She's snagged! I'm snagged hard on the bottom!" "Put some power to it," I said, moving to the rail. "It's probably just a ghost pot, maybe an old net." Sam pushed the lever. The engine bellowed, black smoke poured from the stack, and the steel cable sang like a guitar string. The Maiden dipped her rail almost to the water. "She ain't moving, Earl. The cable's gonna snap. Hold it!" I barked. I grabbed a gaff, leaning way out over the churning water, trying to see the line. It was stretched bar tight, vibrating, disappearing straight down into the gray-green murk. "It's not snagged," I said, more to myself than to him. "It's heavy." "Heavy?" Sam eased off the winch, and the boat groaned in relief. "What do you mean, heavy? A pot full of rocks?" "No," I said, my gut twisting. "It's a dead weight, a solid weight, like pulling up a piece of the bottom itself. I've pulled up a lot of strange things in my time. World War II munitions, old anchors, once even the engine block of a '54 Studebaker. This felt different. It felt wrong. Just bring it up slow, Sam. Easy does. Whatever it is, I want to see it. Doc Sam Finch looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Earl, we cut the line. We call it a loss. There's things down there we ain't meant to bother. It's my gear, Sam. It's my pot. I'm not leaving it. My stubbornness, my wife always said, would be the end of me. It nearly was, that day. For 20 minutes, Sam worked the winch 1 agonizing inch at a time. The boat creaked, the engine sputtered, but the line held. Slowly, a dark shape began to resolve itself in the water below. "It's not a pot," Sam whispered, his face pale. He was right. It was big, rectangular. As it broke the surface, the water sluiced off it, revealing dark, almost black wood, bound in bands of brass that were green with age. It was chests, each big as a coffin. Our crab pot was hopelessly tangled in its rotten rope handles. "Sweet Mother of God," Sam breathed, backing away from the rail. "It's a coffin. It's a trunk, Sam," I said, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Get the gaff. Help me swing it aboard." "Earl, no!" His voice was sharp with real fear now. "That's bad luck. That's wreck luck. You pull a thing like that aboard, you invite the spirits of the men who went down with it. We cut it loose. Now, I'm not cutting loose a $1,000 pot, and I'm not leaving this," I growled, all my curiosity overriding my sense. I grabbed the gaff and hooked the chest, pulling it toward the boat. Sam, loyal to a fault, cursed under his breath, but grabbed the other gaff and helped me. With a final, desperate heave, we slid it over the rail. It hit the deck with a wet, solid thud that seemed to shake the whole boat. We stood there, panting, staring at it. It was ancient, covered in barnacles and sea slime, but the wood itself, a dark teak or mahogany, was strangely sound. The brass bands were tarnished but not rusted through. On the top, barely visible, a small brass plate. I rubbed the grime off it. There was no name, just a symbol, a circle, with a single vertical line cutting through it. We open it. We push it back. Sam, his hand on that medallion again. "This doesn't belong to us, Earl. It belongs to the deep. Belongs to them. It belongs to me now," I said. I grabbed the pry bar from the toolbox. The lock was a huge, old-fashioned brass thing, green and frozen. I jammed the bar into the hasp and put my full weight on it. The sound of that lock breaking was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It echoed across the flat water, a sharp crack that sounded like a dry bone snapping. The fog seemed to press in closer. The air got colder. I hesitated just for a second. Then I lifted the heavy lid. Sam was wrong. There was no gold, no jewels, no bones, just 2 things resting on a bed of rotted velvety cloth. On the left, there was a compass, not like any I'd ever seen. It was heavy brass, maybe 6 inches across, but the glass was perfectly clear, as if it had been polished that morning. There was no water inside. On the right, there was a book, a journal, bound in dark leather. It was soaked, of course, but as I reached in to touch it, I pulled my hand back fast. "What is it?" Sam, "It's warm," I said, bewildered. I touched it again. The leather cover was distinctly, unnervingly warm to the touch, like an animal sleeping. I ignored Sam's choking sound and lifted the compass. It was heavy. I expected the needle to be frozen with rust and salt, but as I held it, the needle spun twice and then settled, pointing. I looked at the wheelhouse compass. I looked back at the one in my hand. "Earl," his voice trembling, "what's it pointing at?" I stared at it, my blood running cold. "It ain't pointing north. It's pointing straight down." I didn't listen to stubbornness. I told him I'd log it with the Port Authority, that it was salvage, but I never did. When we got the maiden tied up, he just looked at me, his face all pinched and gray. "That thing's got the deep on it, Earl," he said quiet-like. "Some things, they want to be lost. You should let 'em be." I just grunted, told him I'd see him in the morning. I didn't go home, not right away. I waited till Sam Finch had driven off, his tail lights swallowed by the fog before he even left the parking lot. Then I carried that chest, heavy as sin, to my truck. The compass I put in my coat pocket. The book, I held that in my hand. It was still warm. Or maybe it just felt that way against the damp chill of the evening. I hid the chest in my workshop under a pile of old tarp. I told my wife, Martha, I'd found some old brass fitting I might polish. She just nodded, used to me bringing home flotsam. But the book, the compass, I took those inside. I put them on my big oak desk in the little room where I kept my chart. The fog didn't lift. That was the next thing. Usually, that kind of pea soup fog burns off with the afternoon sun or a good, strong wind. This stayed. It settled over the town like a wet blanket for one day, then two. The entire Dungeness fleet was trapped at the docks. The Coast Guard was issuing advisories, telling everyone to stay put. The whole world shrank to the size of our harbor. And in that quiet, housebound world, my obsession began. The compass sat on my desk, its needle pointing straight at the floorboards. Unwavering, I tapped the glass. It didn't budge. I put a big magnet next to it. Nothing. The needle held its course, pointing to the earth. But the diary, that was the real hook. It was soaked through, the pages swollen shut, the leather cover smelling of salt and something else, something metallic like old pennies. I set it by the fireplace, not too close, just to let the air get at it. The first night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking. I went to the workshop, pulled the tarp off. I studied that symbol carved in the lid, the circle and the line. It looked like a compass rose, but with only one direction. I went back inside around 3 a.m. The house was cold. I stood in my study, staring at the diary. The edges of the pages were starting to dry, rippling like seaweed, and I thought I heard something, a whisper, like the sound of wind in a seashell. I thought it was just the house settling. The second day, the fog was still there, thicker than ever. The men were getting restless down at the tavern, but I stayed home. I told Martha I was mending gear. I was lying. I was sitting at my desk, watching that book. The first page had dried enough to separate from the cover. The paper was thick, almost like vellum. The ink was a rusty brown like dried blood, and the handwriting, it wasn't English. Not exactly. It was spiky, angular, made of symbols I'd never seen. But as I stared at it, the symbols seemed to resolve. My eyes would water, and for a second I could almost read them. The toll is paid. I blinked. The symbols were just symbols again. I rubbed my eyes. The fire was popping. I must have been dozing. That night, I heard it again, the whisper. It was clearer this time. It wasn't the house. It was coming from the fog outside the window, and it sounded like, "Hey, Earl." My blood went ice cold. I looked at the compass. The needle was still pointing down. On the third day, Sam Riley came knocking. The fog was so dense I didn't see him walk up the path. He just appeared on my porch like an apparition. His face was a wreck. "You look like hell, Earl," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. He pushed past me into the house. "You ain't been to the dock? You ain't been to the tavern? Martha's worried." "I'm fine, Sam, just mending." His eyes scanned the room and locked on the desk. He saw the compass. He saw the drying book. "You brought it in?" he whispered, horrified. "Into your home? With your wife? It's just an old logbook, Sam, an antique." "The hell it is!" he snapped, his voice shaking. He was genuinely, truly afraid. "That ain't no logbook. That's a receipt. I've heard the stories, old stories, from the Haida and the Salish, about what sleeps in the canyons, about the—" He dropped his voice so low I could barely hear him. "About the guardians, things that were here before the first men, things that collect." "You're spooked, Finch. It's the fog." "It's not the fog," he shouted, then grabbed my arm. His grip was like a steel trap. "The fog is because of that. Don't you feel it? The air? It's waiting. It's waiting for you to pay it back. You stole from the collection plate, Earl. Throw it back, now, before it takes something else in trade." I shook him off. I was angry. Angry because, deep down, I was terrified. "Get out of my house, Sam. I'm not throwing away a find like this because of some Indian ghost story." Sam looked at me for a long time. The color had drained from his face. "It ain't a ghost story, Earl," he said, his voice flat and dead. "And it ain't Indians it belongs to. It's older than that." He backed out the door into the fog. "God help you, Earl. You brought a shadow into your house, and it's got your name." He was wrong about that. The shadow wasn't in my house. It was in my head that night. That was the worst night. The diary was almost dry. More pages were separating. And the words, I could read them now, not just glimpses. Spiky writing flowed in my mind. It wasn't a logbook. Sam was right. It was a ledger. It spoke of packs, of trading a voice for direction. It spoke of the toll for safe passage. And over it mentioned the guardian who sleeps, and the silence that must be kept. The last page I could read had one clear line. He who holds the needle must answer the call. The whispering was constant now. Earl McKenna. It was in the chimney. It was in the rattling of the window pane. It was in the sound of my own blood rushing in my ear. I looked at the brass compass. The needle wasn't pointing down anymore. It was pointing northwest, out the window, towards the sea. I couldn't take it. It was a physical pull, like a rope tied around my gut. I had to go. I had to. I grabbed my heaviest coat. Martha was asleep. I scribbled a note. Fog's lifting. Going to check the maiden. A complete lie. The fog was thicker than bilge mud. I drove to the harbor. The docks were deserted. A ghost town of moored boats. The maiden was dark, rocking slightly, her lines groaning. I climbed aboard. The silence deafening. I went to the wheelhouse. I didn't turn on the radar. I didn't turn on the depth sounder. Fired up the big diesel. The thrum, thrum, thrum sounded monstrously loud in the dead quiet. I cast off the line. I was flying blind, utterly blind. It was the most reckless, stupid thing I've ever done as a seaman. I could have hit the jetty, another boat, a deadhead. But I didn't, because I wasn't steering by the ship's compass. I was steering by brass one I'd set on the console. The needle was steady, pointing me through the fog. It guided me out of the harbor, through the narrows, and into the open water of the Salish Sea. I drove for maybe an hour, throttle wide open. The fog was so thick, the bow of my own boat was just a gray suggestion. The sea was still, that same dead, glassy flat. Then the needle on the brass compass spun. It spun once, wildly, then locked, pointing straight down. The exact same second it locked, the maiden's engine coughed. It sputtered, choked on its own fuel, and died. I was plunged into a silence so profound it was like being deaf. No engine, no gulls, no wind, not even the sound of waves lapping against the hull. The water was perfectly still. The boat just sat there. Nothing. The key turned, but the starter didn't even click. The radio was dead. The lights were dead. All my electronics were gone. I stumbled out onto the deck. The cold was brutal. It went right through my oilskins. I looked over the sides, black but clear. In the dim glow of my flashlight, I could see nothing, just blackness. I was in a place I'd never been. My charts didn't show this. It was supposed to be 100, maybe 200 feet deep here. A cold dread, heavier than any anchor, settled on me. I felt like I was being watched from below. The whisper was gone. There was only wait. I don't know why I did it. Instinct, compulsion, maybe the diary told me to. I went to the stern, grabbed my heaviest test rod, the one I used for sounding bottoms, spooled with 400-pound test line. I grabbed a chunk of herring from the bait bucket. I hooked the bait, it over the side. I didn't even feel it hit the water. The line just paid out, and out, and out. It went down 100 feet, 300 feet, 500 feet. God, the spool was emptying. It was deeper than any canyon on the charts. It went down until the line just stopped. I stood there, holding the rod, my knuckles white. The boat didn't move. The fog didn't move. I waited. 1 minute, 5, nothing. I felt like a fool, a terrified, frozen fool. I started to reel in. The line was heavy, not a snag. It was that same impossible dead weight feeling from the chest. I reeled for 10 minutes, my arms burning. Whatever was on the line wasn't fighting. It was just letting itself be pulled up. Finally, I saw the leader. I reeled the heavy steel hook out of the water. My flashlight beam hit it. The herring was gone. The hook itself was clean. Not just clean, it shone in the light, bright, metallic, as if it had been buffed by 1,000 hands. And it was coated in a thin film of something, a dark, oily, viscous substance that hadn't been there when I sent it down. It pulsed with a faint, oily luminescence, a sick, greenish black. It smelled like ozone and deep-sea mud and pennies. My hand was shaking, but I had to know. I reached out one finger, just the tip, and I touched the oil on the hook. A jolt of pure, agonizing cold shot up my arm, straight into my chest, and exploded behind my eye. It wasn't just cold. It was the absence of heat, the absence of life. It knocked me back against the rail. And then I heard the voice. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't in the fog. It was inside my skull, as clear and loud as if Sam were standing next to me. But it wasn't Sam. The voice was ancient. It was vast. It sounded like glaciers grinding stones at the bottom of the ocean. And it said, with perfect, terrible clarity, "We see you, Earl McKenna." I dropped the rod. It clattered to the deck, and the sound of it hitting the fiberglass was like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. My heart, son, I thought my heart was going to punch its way right out of my chest. That voice wasn't just in my head. It was in my bones, in my teeth. It was a cold, possessive, knowing sound. It knew my name. "We see you, Earl McKenna." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, like a scientist looking at a bug under glass. I scrambled backward, falling over a coil of rope, crab-walking away from the stern, away from that polished, oily hook. I didn't care about the rod. I didn't care about the line. I only cared about the distance. I lunged for the wheelhouse, slammed the door shut, and fumbled for the ignition key. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get it in the slot. I was whimpering, a grown man, a seasoned fisherman, whimpering like a lost child. I finally jammed the key in and twisted it. My eyes squeezed shut. Nothing. Dead. I tried again. Dead. The silence outside seemed to get heavier, pressing in on the glass of the wheelhouse. I could feel it. The guardian. It was down there, right under my keel, looking up, waiting. It had seen me. It had touched me through that line, and it was waiting for... My eyes flew to the brass compass on the console. The needle was still pointing straight down, vibrating, humming almost like a live wire. "What do you want?" I whispered to it. The voice didn't answer. There was only the thick, dead... I was trapped, dead in the water, in a fog-shrouded patch of ocean that wasn't on any map, with something ancient aware beneath me. I thought of Sam Finch Riley. "You stole from the collection plate, Earl. It's waiting for you to pay it back." I looked at the compass, then at the open door of the wheelhouse. The oily hook was still on the deck, gleaming faintly. I couldn't do it. I couldn't go back out there. "Take it!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Take it all. Just let me go." I don't know who I was talking to. The compass, the thing in the water, God. Maybe all three. I grabbed the brass compass. It was cold now, so cold it burned my hand, and I threw it. I hurled it with all my strength out the side window. I heard it hit the flat water with a small, sharp plop. The instant it was gone, the instant the water swallowed it, the Maiden's engine roared to life. It didn't sputter. It didn't cough. It exploded into a full-throated, deafening roar, as if I'd been holding the key in the start position the whole time. The boat shuddered. Lights flickered on. The radar screen blipped, and the depth sounder screamed. Its screen, just a jumble of red static. I didn't wait to see what the sounder said. I slammed the throttle forward so hard I'm surprised I didn't snap the lever. The maiden dug her stern in and leaped forward, her diesel bellowing. I grabbed the wheel and spun it hard to port, turning us back the way I'd come, or the way I hoped I'd come. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just drove. I drove that boat like a madman, blind in the fog, tears of sheer raw terror streaming down my... I drove until the fuel gauge started to dip low, until my knuckles were white on the wheel, until the first sick gray light of dawn began to finally break through the fog. When the sun hit, the fog didn't just burn off. It evaporated. It vanished in 10 minutes, like a curtain being ripped away, and I saw the jetty of my harbor dead ahead. I'd steered a perfect course home. I tied up the maiden so clumsily I almost tore a cleat off the dock. I stumbled onto dry land, my legs shaking like jelly. I knelt and put my hands flat on the wet wood of the dock just to feel something solid. I went home. Martha was in the kitchen, her face etched with worry. "Earl, I was about to call the Coast Guard. Your note. The fog was... Where have you been?" I walked past her into my study. The desk was empty. The diary was gone. Not a trace. No damp spot on the wood. No faint smell of salt and old pennies. It was just gone, as if it had never been. I slept for 24 hours. When I woke up, Sam was sitting in the chair by my bed. Martha must have let him in. He just sat there watching me, his hat in his hands. "You look..." He started, then stopped. "I know," I said. My voice was a dry rasp. "You took it out, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. The compass? "I gave it back," I whispered. "I threw it back. The book. It's gone." Sam let out a breath he must have been holding since he'd knocked on my door. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the now bright, sunny day. "It took its payment then," he said. "The toll. You gave it back what it wanted." I think so." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were full of a sad old pity. "Not all of it, Earl." He was right. I sold the Iron Maiden that week. Got a terrible price for her, but I didn't care. I bought a small 25-foot cuddy cabin, a boat for pottering around the islands, never more than a mile from shore. My deep-sea days were over. My nerve was gone. But here's the part I never told Sam, the part I never told Martha. The sea took the compass. It took the diary, but it left something, a trade, like the diaries. From that day until this, I have never needed a compass. I don't mean I got good at dead reckoning. I mean, I know. I can be in my boat in the blackest night, in the thickest fog, and I know exactly where north is. I feel it right here in my chest, a cold, steady pull. And the fishing. I always knew where to drop my line. I'd be fishing for cod and just know I needed to move 100 yards east, where the halibut were schooling. I'd feel the currents before they turned. See, it had seen me all right, and it had left a small, cold piece of itself inside me. So you ask if it was real? I'm an old man now. My hands are stiff, my back aches, and my eyes are cloudy. But on nights when the fog rolls in thick, and the air gets that dead, expectant quiet, I still hear it. It's not a shout. It's not even a whisper. It's just a feeling, a cold presence on the edge of my hearing. We see you, Earl McKenna. The sea is a deep, deep place, son, and it doesn't like to be disturbed, but much is when it gets disturbed and it notices you back. The ocean isn't cruel and it isn't kind. It's just true. It's a mirror for whatever you bring to it. If you bring greed, it reflects your greed. If you bring arrogance, it reflects your arrogance. But if you come to it with an open hand, looking for a simple truth, well, you might find it. The real trouble starts when you find something in the deep that wasn't meant for you, and you're arrogant enough to think you can keep it. The sea always collects its debt. If this old man's story put a chill in your bones, well, maybe there are more tales to tell. Do an old fisherman a favor and subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps keep these old memories afloat.